In this special episode of Signs of the Times Radio, we take a look at a heartbreaking issue: suicide. You'll meet a woman who is grieving the recent loss of her grandson, trying to make sense of this tragedy and reaching out for rays of hope in the darkness.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Well, I should tell you, listener, that we are going to be dealing with some pretty tough topics today, in particular the topics of depression and suicide. So if that's not your cup of tea, completely understand. This is maybe not the episode of Signs of the Times Radio for you. If you do want to proceed, however, we will try to do so with sensitivity, and we do encourage you to, seek support, whether that's in your own, family and friends, at church, people or whether that's a professional help. We'll mention some details about that at the end of the episode. But for now, I'm really excited to invite Aleta Bainbridge to the studio. How are you, Aleta?
I'm well today, thank you.
Now, Aleta, you wrote an article for us in the August edition of Signs of the Times entitled "The Gospel According to Leonard." And this was something I imagine was really difficult for you to write because Leonard has passed away just recently, suicide, a terrible situation there. But you write about him with such love and affection and happy memories. Tell us about Leonard.
Leonard was my first grandson,
Mm-hmm.
and I was there when he was born.
Mm-hmm.
I held his mother's hand through the whole process. She was a single mother, disillusioned, disappointed by the person who had sworn love to her forever, and then as soon as she was pregnant, disappeared. So Leonard was born out of wedlock, and I was there watching him being born and saw him being placed on his mum's chest like a little plump puppy, grunting away. I will never forget that moment. And I just fell in love with him, and our bond has strengthened over the years, the 30 years that I knew him.
Wow. So in some ways, Lenny's start was a difficult one by the sound of it in terms of his, family situation, but he had support, obviously, from his mum, from you, from other family members. But he struggled, didn't he, through his life? Smart kid by the sound of it.
Very smart, but very, very calm little boy, beautiful child. But a single mother's life is not easy. And there's a lot of rejection that happens for a little boy whose mother's involved with new chaps who are on the scene, wanting to make a relationship with her, but not wanting the little boy. And so he was often actually badly treated.
Pushed to the side.
But even violent behavior sometimes. One man was sort of strange, and he actually fired shots into Lenny's room when he was a little boy.
Goodness. Because
of his anger. He took out his anger on the child. So Lenny grew up with his mother trying to protect him, but at the same time, his sensitivity made him feel that he was at fault. Everything lay at his door. He was the one who was causing his mum to battle with her finance.
Happens like that so often, doesn't it, with kids? Like mum and dad divorce, for example, and the kids are left wondering, what did I do wrong? And
That's right.
It's so far from the truth, but it's a really powerful idea that seems to stick somehow. So,
and he just developed from there. He developed nightmares. He used to battle to sleep because of the terrible nightmares that he had. That is actually, I think, what the tragedy of his life was, that at that time he was exposed to street vendors of drugs who told him that weed was a good way of dealing with his sadness and with his nightmares and everything, and so he believed them. And there is a certain amount of truth in it. It gives them a little bit of time, just a couple of hours maybe. I don't know the details, but I know that it does give them the idea that they are being supported. But in fact,
obviously people wouldn't use marijuana or other drugs if it had no positive effect. So obviously it did have a positive effect, but as you're saying, and as you point out in your article, when it wears off, you're back in a very similar situation, and sometimes a worse one, because now you're broke, and they're coming down from drugs is often leaves you feeling worse, like physically, psychologically, than when you started. Yes,
it's a very, very sad thing because it eases the tension, eases the pain for that little while, but then, especially if you've been brought up with good values, you feel guilty afterwards as well.
Yeah.
He knew and he didn't actually want to do it. And when he realized, he was told that he would not be addicted to it, that marijuana and weed are not addictive. And he swore blind that it wasn't that, but people who are struggling emotionally develop a psychological dependence. Even though they might feel that they are not physically dependent on grass or weed or whatever you want to call it, it does have an addictive quality to it.
Actually, remember when I was a probation and parole officer in Adelaide, quite a few years ago now, one of the guys who was on probation with me, he said to me, "It's the worst drug there is." And I'm like, "Really?" From his perspective, in terms of the way that it just messed with his brain, messed with his memory, messed with his lifestyle, for him, it was, very, very destructive. And Lenny was dealing with depression as well, wasn't he? And
that's what
and cannabis is a depressant. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. It's his very sensitive nature that we discovered afterwards through many discussions that we'd had, that he tended to look at the darker strains, melancholic, they call it. And because of that, this great sensitivity, he felt things deeply. And so as a result, the use of drugs really dragged him in and, as you say, aggravated the depression.
But I guess through the, while you would have been concerned for him, with this sort of decisions he was making, there must have been happy times with him and the family events that you remember?
Oh, yes. Look, there's always the balance to it. And he and I had a wonderful relationship. In fact, I remember once when he was 10 and I realized he was depressed. And I said to my daughter, I'm going to take him and do something about this now. So I put him in the car and I took him on a holiday. And he cheered up when I fell into the water from our canoe because I hired a canoe. And immediately his depression lifted because his grandma had fallen into the drink. And so all the way through, I was there to kind of mediate. And then later on, when I was writing a book at a seaside village, he would sometimes come and spend time with me. But then, he would have to go back to school or back to whatever it was. And he would then slip back into his old ways. And it's, you just... He was continually disappointed in himself. Continually disappointed in himself.
And it kind of sounds like he felt a need to escape, whether it was escaping on holiday with his grandma or whether it was escaping into drugs, just anything to get away from everyday life. Everyday life was just, too much for him? Or
Yes, and of course, because he had a younger sister who was everything that he was not. She was bright, she was organized, she was good at school, and he had a very rare kind of form of dyslexia, which was only picked up later on. So it made him look dumb. But in fact, he was totally, both lobes of his brain were completely balanced. So when the images came in, they didn't know whether to go to the left or to the right lobe because there was no dominance. And so he would slow down, and he never was good at spelling, as dyslexics never are. And it was only later on that they discovered that he was, that he had this learning difficulty, and that was the reason why he was not doing so well at school. So he had to go to a special school, and then he felt, how kids are. He was sensitive because why am I a nut case, or what is it that puts me into this? And and then they wanted to put him onto, what's that stuff that everybody goes on to, kids?
Ritalin or something?
Ritalin. It sounded to him as if popping a pill could actually help him. So that was not a good thing. Unfortunately, his mother didn't go with that way. But it was a complex problem with Leonard. It wasn't just straightforward. There were happy times. We are a very integrated family, very close family. So family gatherings and that. But Leonard he never had much of a sense of self-worth. And the fact that he didn't have a father, that really, really hit him hard. That hit him hard. When other kids were drawing pictures for their father for Father's Day, he just crumpled up his paper, threw it, and just sat there with his head in his hands. So the lack of a father figure really, really threw him down.
Boy, he copped a real cluster of real difficult struggles, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah, he did. So I guess, as you say, it was a close family. You were there, the happy family events, struggles, but you were together. But I guess at some point you're in Australia now, and this is all in South Africa, yeah?
That's right.
So Lenny, moves through school into young adulthood, and then how long ago? What was this? Just last year, or earlier this year, when you started hearing phone calls and
all the way, ever. As long as I know Lenny, one of his happiest times was when he was in Israel on a kibbutz, and he was actually working for people who appreciated the amount of work that he could do. So he had a job, and he felt respected, and he was happy. But then he had visa problems. He had to come back to this country, to South Africa anyway. And I was always aware that Lenny was, if you like, on the edge because of his high emotional level. First of all, he was highly moral. He believed in great morality. He was always seeking, searching, looking, reading, exploring new ideas. So he was a bright person, and we would phone each other no matter where we were and talk for hours on the telephone. And both of us were, we knew how to go from one subject to the other and just enjoy each other's exploring of ideas and thoughts. But as he struggled to find a job, as he struggled to find his position in life, we all have to have a sense that we are not just floating, that we have a task, that we are here for a purpose. We've got to have meaning.
Which is why the kibbutz experience was so positive for him, wasn't it? He had work, he had a purpose, he had respect and appreciation for what he was doing.
He was being paid. He was able to travel, and he loved traveling. So his sense of adventure was tickled there as well. And so when he got back and he couldn't find the money to go back, and that was something that we need to take into consideration. Poverty plays a big part in, not necessarily the only thing, because there are people who struggle with poverty and they rise above it.
Some of the happiest people in the world, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when that blocks every channel that you have of moving forward, of studying. Last year he wanted to go into do a course in plumbing, and it was a wonderful course, but there just wasn't money to fund it.
Yeah.
And he was so disappointed.
Frustrated at every turn.
Yes, exactly. So every turn led him like that, and people who are dealing with somebody like that often use unfair language. You're just a loser. You aren't able to make it through life.
I think people get compassion fatigue sometimes. You know what I mean? Like if you're dealing with someone who's difficult, who's always on a downer, who's always seems to be struggling, after a while it sort of gets a bit old, and you kind of run out of sympathy, which is tragic because they don't actually need it any less. But your capacity to give, you know.
can't carry somebody always. And I think that the problem comes from many sides. And I think we can be aware of the struggle and rather find a way of becoming part of the solution instead of damning the person or labeling them. You know, just take away the labels and make positive suggestions rather. I don't believe anybody can blame themselves or blame anybody else when you reach adulthood. I think we've got to take responsibility for our own choices, our actions, as difficult as life may be. And he did have opportunities. But I think the unfortunate thing also was that he made a girl pregnant at a point. And it was something he never wanted to do.
Because he was basically repeating where he'd come from,
That's it. He knew what it was to grow up without a father, and he didn't feel he was ready for fatherhood. And because of the fact that he didn't have a job, a steady job, he was unable to support the new baby, whom he absolutely adored. And he went down to be with a mother who moved back in with her parents a little distance from where Leonard was living, because she needed that kind of support and he couldn't support her. And so he went down to be with Nathan when he was born, but the parents were always unhappy about who Lenny was. Firstly, the fact that he had made their daughter pregnant out of wedlock, you know, and he wanted to marry her, but he didn't have the stability or the means or whatever it was. And so in the long run, they refused him visiting rights.
Oh, dear.
And that really threw him into...
It would have broke him all over again,
very, very low state. In fact, it was just before this that he had watched a DVD, and it's a fantastic DVD for people who are struggling with their father image, and that happens a lot, especially with God as a father figure, in a world where fathers can be so brutal or ineffective or absent or whatever it may be.
A father wound, I think the phrase is sometimes used.
Yes, and the importance of a good father relationship is being shown to be something totally essential to the healthy development of any child, male or female. And so for anybody looking for some kind of answer to that, is a good DVD.
Yes. So tell us about this DVD.
To listen to. It's called Seeing God as the Perfect Father. And it is presented by a pastor, an Atlanta pastor called Louis Giglio.
Yeah, okay.
And he presents it in such an amazing way. And Lenny was delighted.
Made a deep impression on him.
He phoned me and the excitement was kind of palpable right across the line, you know. Grandma, God is my father. He is the perfect father. He has supported me. He's guided me. I see it now. And it really changed a lot of what Leonard was about. And for a long time, he was off drugs. He pulled himself together. He sent out his CV. He actually made some money on the stock exchange. And so it looked as if he was, you know, really coming right. And to that end, he wanted to go down and see Nate.
His son.
His son, and say, look, my life is coming right. Can I see him? Can I talk to him? Can we start, you know, trying to fix this thing because I now have a job? But they wouldn't let him.
Heartbreak.
They just completely cut him off. And he went back and went onto drugs.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there was this horrible day when you got a phone call telling you that Your grandson Lenny was in hospital?
Well, what actually happened was Garth and I went across to South Africa in December for a Christmas holiday.
Your husband and you, yeah.
And that's my husband and me, yeah. We went across and we spent a month there, and I had a chance to visit Leonard, and I realized then that he was down. We had a family wedding, and he was one of the best men at the wedding. I have 4 children, and the youngest is quite a lot younger. So although he is Lenny's uncle, he's really not much older. He's 5 years older than Lenny.
Yeah.
And he had a huge effect on Lenny's life, and he was getting married, and Leonard was there. But I could see that Lenny was struggling. I could see that he was not himself. And I made up my mind that when I got back to Australia and I was in a stable place, I would phone him and we'd have one of our big long chats and just find out what was actually eating him.
Sure.
So that was in December. January, February, my husband is a pastor, and we were trying to get the church running for the new year. So we were mad busy. And March was coming up, and I said, in March, I will speak to Leonard and we will sort this thing out. And on the 3rd of March, I got this frantic call from my daughter saying, please, Mum, pray for Lenny. He's struggling for his life. He committed suicide. He hanged himself. And we're waiting for the paramedics to come. Pray for him.
Goodness, you must have felt very far away at that point.
I have a way of dealing with a crisis, which actually puts a lid on it. I remain very calm and scream inside. God hears that scream. But my first thing is, let's pray. And so we put out the word, and my son, the one who got married, actually was at a picnic after church with a whole lot of Christian friends, and they all just gathered together immediately and prayed for Lenny. On our family network, we all prayed, just please give Lenny another chance. And so the fascinating thing was that his sister knew nothing about this, before the event. And at church that day, she'd gone into the prayer room and written a card, I'm praying for Lenny today. There are things that comfort me because I feel that he was being prayed for. The thing that sounds as if it should really upset me, but really gave me comfort, was the fact that I discovered afterwards that he had tried to phone me 10 minutes before he'd committed suicide.
Goodness.
And I know that it was, I think, his last attempt. I think what happened was a cry for help. I think he was really, it was his last bid to say, this is desperate now. I really need help. And unfortunately, because of the time difference between South Africa and there, my phone was off.
Ah, right.
And I hadn't looked at it. And it was only afterwards when I looked at it that I saw that there had been phone calls, and that's when my daughter managed to get hold of me.
That must have broken your heart to see that missed call.
Yes.
Yeah.
It did break my heart, but at the same time, I knew that he was reaching out and that things could have been different.
It's very difficult in those circumstances, isn't it, to avoid. A lot of people start blaming themselves and asking, what if, looking for someone or something to blame, and that must be really tough. I can't imagine that.
I think when you are a grandma and you've been through enough stuff with children and grandchildren and even now a great-grandchild, you start realizing that there are certain questions that are almost totally useless, like could have, should have, would have.
What if?
If only, and all of that. And obviously you do look at those things, and it's necessary to explore them.
Sure.
Because otherwise you never learn from it. But at the same time, I do also feel that there are many questions that you ask like that will not find easy answers, and that maybe years later or maybe in the hereafter we will actually get the real answers. And one has to sometimes say, everybody has done the best they can, and the only thing now is to learn from it.
Wow.
And for me, I did not have any sense of guilt when it came to Leonard.
Wow.
Because we had a special bond. And the fact that he'd phoned me to want to talk to me, I knew it was his spiritual reaching out, because we always spoke about the deep meaning of life. And he came away from it feeling encouraged. So I know that he wanted that. And it may be, I don't know. I'm not a fatalist. But perhaps Lenny's time had come.
Yeah, it's hard to know, isn't it? I mean, regardless of the fact whether he could or couldn't get hold of you or get hold of anyone, it was his choice in the end, wasn't it?
That's right.
It was his choice, yeah.
That's right.
Boy, so I guess this whole experience seems to have pushed you in a direction of trying to understand more about, suicide and self-harming thoughts and self-harming behaviours, and you've actually found some pretty scary sort of statistics.
I have, but before we even go there, I would like to say that reading Leonard's diary, his journal, that he had left, and some of the letters that he had written but hidden, I think it was kind of almost saying, I've reached the end of my tether. If something happens now that can help me, I will destroy these letters. But if they don't, they're there. So I think he was on the cusp of trying to find a way out, but he just knew that he'd reached the point where he'd lost faith in himself, faith in his world, faith in everything. He was believing the lies that he was worthless, that people would be better off without him, that in fact he was doing the whole world a favor by doing this. And this came through in his journal over and over again. And I know him so well. I could sense the sensitivity, the heart cry. And also listening to some of his favorite songs.
His music, yeah.
Exploring, because he was a great lover of music and arts and all of that. Listening to the kind of things that gave him comfort have given me comfort too.
Yeah. It's a connection, isn't it?
Yes, and I realized that he didn't, strangely enough, die without hope because he had found his perfect father. And I wonder in those last moments if he wasn't just saying, it's over to you now. And I don't think that's a wise thing to do.
Well, I mean, look, I think it's, really powerful what you say, that he'd believed these lies, that, that he was worthless, that the world was better off without him. You're very clear about that.
Yes.
Those things were a lie. I mean, it's great that he had a sense of peace, he had a sense of connection, with God. But nevertheless, it's not like he was thinking completely straight. No. Was he?
No, because he was at that stage on drugs, which were aggravating his depression, aggravating his confused thinking and all of that. But for me now, I believe we need to find ways of helping others who are in a similar situation. Yeah,
and there are a lot of others. I mean, you brought in some of these statistics that just, blew me away. I mean, I thought I knew this stuff, but when you read it, wow, suicide is the leading cause of death for Australians between 15 and 44 years of age. The leading cause. So more leading than motor vehicle accidents, more leading than heart attacks. And
yes.
And wow. And we're talking about 65,000 Australians who attempt suicide.
And 3,000 who actually get it right in a year.
Well, right or very, very wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
3,000 Australians complete their suicide.
To do. Yes.
So this is not an isolated issue. There must be a lot of our listeners out there who have been touched by this. And I know it's pretty fresh and pretty raw for you, and you're not a helping professional, but What could you say to someone out there who perhaps like Lenny is struggling with these negative spiraling thoughts and feelings and starting to think in the direction of self-harm or ending their life?
First of all, I'd like to say that I came up with some information from somebody, a professional I've been speaking to, who said when somebody is a melancholic,
one of these deep, artistic, deep feeling people
who tend to depression, tough love actually isn't the answer.
Oh, right.
Because they say that they really need somebody who will give them meaning, who will give them a sense of their value, and who will dispel the lies that their minds are telling them. Because depression is often the result of a very low self-worth, a very, very bad abuse in childhood, and there are many causes for depression, and that is also something that is a worldwide phenomenon today.
Depression. It's been called an epidemic.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they go together, and I think that I know of a little girl in my granddaughter's school back in South Africa who is 12, and she feels there's no meaning to her life, and that if she could, she would do away with herself, and she's 12. And I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking we need to start really taking this very seriously and helping people to understand that if there's anybody around that who displays any words like that, my life is worthless, or where you can see the depression is serious, we cannot leave it there. We need to be very responsible about it for their sake, because they are not thinking straight at that moment.
Yeah.
At that point, they are so deep that they cannot see reality.
It's interesting you say that, because I remember hearing a study that said that people who had, followed through with some sort of suicide attempt, but, had been revived or whatever, actually said, looking back on it 12 months later, like it's a very high percentage, like 90% of those people say that I'm glad that I didn't, complete that suicide.
Yeah.
So that just tells you that, even though you can't see light at the end of the tunnel at that moment, it seems there's nowhere to go. It's amazing how time does heal. It's a cliche, but there's truth to it. Give it a few months, several months, things will look different. Yeah.
Look, this is the thing that is so sad with Leonard, is that he'd been trying to get into a good rehab that he trusted, and there'd be no place for him. And the day before he actually committed the act, a place had become available for him, but they hadn't yet let the family know.
It's another one of these if-onlys, isn't
yes.
it? Yeah.
And, if he'd managed to get hold of me, it might have changed it. So there are many things. And
who knows?
Who knows? He might have after coming out of rehab, found a job. So the message to get out is that the truth, which is a cliche, but it is a truth, is while there's life, there's hope. And if you can find that hope, or if somebody can give it to you, and that's what we are there, I think, is to be hope bearers.
As friends and family.
Yes, light bearers. And to be very aware of people who are struggling. In fact, I think we should inquire in our morning devotions, is there somebody that today I can speak to where I can bring hope? Because that, for me, was Christ's mission statement. He said that I'm here to lift those who are depressed, to give them a crown of glory instead of garments of heaviness. And that was his whole, and we know that Jesus is seen even by his enemies to be the most amazing light in this dark world. And
I know, Aleta, you do see this whole issue in terms of a spiritual battle. I mean, you talk about the lies that might come in someone's mind, and I understand you see that as a negative spiritual forces planting those lies quite often, and there is a real battle going on behind the scenes for our lives and for our souls, and And as praying people,
Yes.
like you say, you spend that time in the morning to say, God, I want to be a part of this battle on the side of light and goodness and hope.
And the Bible says that the force of evil is a liar. And he's the father of lies and the liar from the beginning. That is how he is labeled. And these lies, you know, that if you take substances, you are helping yourself. That's just a blatant lie, because it actually is quite the opposite.
Destructive.
It's destructive. Where somebody says you are worthless, that is the biggest lie of all for a Christian.
Oh, yeah.
Because,
or for anyone.
Yeah.
Because Jesus didn't die just for Christians.
That's right. But what I mean, if you are a Christian and you believe that, then you should never believe that you're worthless.
Yes, yes.
But yes, you're right. As far as I'm concerned, everybody has a value. And we are there to help them find that value. And so, yeah, he was not worthless. The other lie was that people would be better off without him. And I think of the heartache and the pain that people have suffered because of
that
he's
decision.
missing. He's not there anymore at the family gatherings. His place is missing. His little nephew said, "I'm going to miss the Lenny carrying me around on his shoulders." And so many people have affirmed how much they valued him. And yet he couldn't see
know
it. He didn't realize it. Those were lies. Those were the lies that make me angry, because it is destroying human life, human hope.
Wow. So look, I imagine there are probably some fellow Travers out there, Aleta, who have gone through something similar to you. You know, losing someone to suicide. I mean, you're obviously still very much in the middle of your journey of healing, but are there any insights that you can pass on to them just as we finish?
Well, my first thing is, don't believe the lies. It says resist the devil and he will flee from you. So in other words,
I think the Apostle Paul said that, didn't he?
Yes, when the little voice is saying to you, you're worthless, say no and resist it. And then take steps to actually be proactive. Realize that you are depressed, that you're not thinking straight, and make a list of the negative thoughts that you're thinking about yourself. Write them down, and then in a column next to it, write what you know to be the reality. And compare the two and keep that before you often and repeat it over and over. Maybe find a Bible verse that you like and that says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Yeah, it's a strong one.
Yes, verses like, you know, that I will never leave you or forsake you, or you are mine. I have died for you. Write out those things and stick them up everywhere to retrain the mind, which has been damaged to think a certain way. Retrain it with positive thoughts. It takes a while, and it takes absolute determination to do it. But if you're still struggling on your own, talk to people.
Absolutely. And this is what you've been telling me about. You're going through your journey of grieving right now.
Yes.
And you found it helpful to talk to helping professional, your family, and even other people who have suffered a similar thing. You find that you and them are sometimes the only people who can really understand what you're going through.
That's right. Absolutely. If you are struggling, you will be amazed. Anybody will be amazed at how many other people out there are struggling with similar issues. And you just raise it or talk about it. But you see, the thing is, we don't trust. Very often when we've been hurt, we don't trust people. So if you find that your trust has been broken, and I'm talking directly to somebody like Lenny, I'm saying if you find that your trust has been broken, try and phone Lifeline, go to your doctor. Your doctor can put you, if money is an object and you want to be objective about it, go to a medical, your doctor, and say, look, I need to be put onto a mental health plan. There are totally clued up with it, and they will put you on a mental health plan that will give you 6 free and possibly even 10 free sessions.
With a psychologist?
With a medical professional psychologist, somebody who is trained in depression therapy or whatever it may be. There are books that we can read that give you positive ideas and thoughts. And, of course, from my point of view, the scripture is just a huge reservoir. It's a treasure trove of promises that reassure us that of our value, of life's meaning. And when you can find meaning for your life, then you're a long way to already starting the healing process.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Aleta. I really appreciate you opening your heart to us and, sharing some of that journey with us. It's been tough, but it's not empty of hope either. So, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening for this week. If you do feel that something you've heard today has, stirred up some difficult feelings for you, please do what Aleta has suggested and talk to someone, a trusted support person, or perhaps a service such as Lifeline. In Australia, that number is 131114. If you're listening in New Zealand, that's 0800 543 354. Or if you're anywhere else, look, there are services there. You can find them via Google. Please remember that you are not alone.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.